Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about the most insane attempt to climb Mount Everest. And when I say insane, I'm really not exaggerating. Today you'll learn the incredible and tragic story of Maurice Wilson's ascent of Everest. But before I begin, I want to say thank you to everyone who made this video possible, all those who support the channel with one-time donations. If you enjoy what I do and want to support me as well, you can do so through the links in the description. Now, let's dive into our story. 19 years before the first successful ascent of Everest, Maurice Wilson decided to fly to the Himalayas and reach the top of the world alone. The problem was, he didn't know how to fly a plane or climb mountains. In 1934, Eric Shipton and Charles Warren found a frostbitten corpse on the slopes of Everest, dressed in a sweater and green trousers. Near the remains was a diary belonging to Maurice Wilson, which described perhaps the most eccentric attempt to climb the world's highest peak. Maurice Wilson was born in 1898 in the English city of Bradford, and after 18 uneventful years, volunteered to fight in World War I. He returned from the war with the rank of captain, clutching a medal for bravery in his only functioning hand. The other was permanently damaged by 2 bullet wounds. Today, Maurice would likely be diagnosed with PTSD and sent to therapy. But 100 years ago, no one even spoke of such things. Emotionally and physically broken, many former soldiers sought solace by fleeing Europe to America or New Zealand. Maurice went to both. During his travels, he managed to marry and divorce twice and open a women's clothing shop. Clearly, none of it brought him emotional peace. In 1932, Maurice was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and the news shattered him. Within a few months, he transformed from a robust man into a gasping skeleton. He boarded the Mayfair to sail home to England to die. But on the ship, he met Indian gurus who taught him their practices of prayer and fasting. Maurice fasted for 32 days and chanted mantras, and unexpectedly recovered. It's hard to say what transformations he underwent during that time, but one thing is clear. The healed Maurice was determined to do something extraordinary. "I haven't gone mad and I'm not a religious fanatic," he wrote. "I just want to prove that with faith anything is possible." His first idea was to parachute onto the summit of Everest, but that was completely unfeasible. So he adjusted the plan: fly to the base of Everest and climb to the top on foot. It's worth noting that few were less suited to the task than Maurice Wilson. Emaciated from illness and fasting, with an injured arm and limited funds, he had never flown a plane or climbed higher than the Bradford Hills. The dream of planting the British flag on Everest had long captivated English climbers. In 1924, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine nearly succeeded. After days of climbing with a well-equipped British expedition, they disappeared near the summit, and debates about whether they reached it lasted for decades. Maurice devoured all the news about the expedition and began training. He walked from Bradford to London and hiked low English hills, which offered no preparation for the brutal Himalayan conditions. But his determination knew no bounds, and he bought a plane. It was a battered old machine with an open cockpit on which he painted Everest, a play on Everest and the phrase Ever Rest. His flying skills barely sufficed for short distances, and the 8,000-kilometer journey seemed impossible. Some said his plan was just a grand suicide attempt by a man who couldn't find his place in the post-war world. Regardless, journalists couldn't ignore him. In 1933-1934 alone, the Times published 151 articles about Everest. 100 of them mentioned Wilson's venture. He planned to take off on April 24th, his birthday, but his first test flight nearly ended in disaster. British authorities tried to stop him, sending a telegram forbidding the flight. "Stop me." "Not a chance," declared Maurice to reporters, theatrically tearing up the message. On May 21st, 1934, he took off, as headlines hailed him as either a hero or a madman. His route across the Alps, the Mediterranean, Cairo, and Baghdad was grueling. Lost in fog with no radio or navigation, he poured water into the fuel tank along with gasoline and suffered under the scorching sun. Reaching India was itself as incredible as summiting Everest. By the end of the flight, Maurice boasted of being a true ace. He landed in Gwadar, nearly crashing, and prepared for the most thrilling part of his journey. It was also the hardest. To climb Everest, you need official permission, which the Royal Geographical Society flatly refused to help him get. To back their refusal, they confiscated his plane. In his usual bold fashion, Maurice tried calling the King of Nepal to ask for support, but never got through. His route to Everest was closed. He spent the following fall and winter in Darjeeling, taking short acclimatization hikes and trying to persuade someone to secretly escort him to Everest. Eventually, 3 Sherpas agreed. Disguised as Tibetan monks, they reached the Rongbuk Monastery near Everest's base camp under cover of night. The group felt terrible due to rapid altitude gain and long treks. In his diary, Wilson increasingly mentioned missing home and food. Plum jam, honey, butter, cheese, biscuits, gifts from heaven, he wrote. Clearly, he no longer believed in the power of fasting, yet his bravado remained. Just 5 more kilometers up and I'm there. He left the Sherpas at the monastery and set out alone. Maurice was in a hurry, convinced Everest's slopes were teeming with climbers trying to steal his glory. In reality, the mountain met him with brutal cold, giant ice masses, and silence. He hoped to find a trail left by previous British expeditions, but none existed. Without warm clothes, crampons, or ropes, he wandered the mountain for 9 days before returning to the monastery, half dead. He spent 3 weeks under Sherpa care, delirious and drifting in and out of sleep. Narrowly escaping death, he wrote in his diary, "I feel successful, I must win," and set out again. 2 Sherpas accompanied him on this second attempt. These hardy mountain men helped Maurice reach Camp 3 at 6,500 meters. There, suffering from severe headaches, malnutrition, and exhaustion, he lay silently in a tent for 3 days. The Sherpas found a tin of King George chocolates left by a British expedition. After a snack, Maurice rallied and decided to make his final push, with over 2 kilometers of vertical climb still ahead. The weather worsened. The Sherpas urged him to descend, but Maurice was adamant. He asked them to wait 10 days in the tent, and if he didn't return, to go down. To summit Everest, he took just 3 bread rolls, a bit of oatmeal, a British flag, and a tent. A pitiful kit. Climbing 400 meters, exhausted, Wilson pitched his tent at 6,900 meters. He stayed there several days, refusing to admit his mission was doomed. On the morning of May 31st, he wrote, "A magnificent day onward." That was the last entry in his diary. In nearly a century of Everest climbs, many bodies have accumulated on the mountain. The cold preserves them well, and they remain in the snow for decades. But sometimes something stranger happens. Everest's glaciers are constantly moving, and if a body enters this icy river, it may be transported across the mountain and reappear in entirely different locations. When Eric Shipton and Charles Warren found Maurice Wilson's body, they buried it in what seemed a secure crevice. But Maurice stayed true to himself even after death. As if with stubborn defiance, his body resurfaced from beneath the ice 5 more times, in 1959, 1975, 1985, 1989, and 1999. Maurice Wilson kept reaching for the summit, and so Maurice Wilson's journey ended not at the summit of Everest, but somewhere far more mysterious, in the snow and silence of a mountain that refused to yield. Was he a fool, a dreamer, or perhaps a man who saw something greater in failure than in never trying at all? What do you think? Would you have attempted the same in his place? Do you admire his courage or question his sanity? Let me know in the comments. I read them all. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, share the video with someone who loves adventure, and subscribe for more true tales from the edge of history. And if you'd like to support the channel and help me keep telling these stories, consider making a small donation using the links in the description. Every bit helps more than you know. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.